Ladies and gents, welcome to the sequel to From Losing to Cruising. This is From Stalling to Mauling. Jess, welcome. Who are you and what are you doing on this show?
Thanks for having me on. My name is Jess Taylor. I'm from Bristol and I stream online at the moment for Flip, fantastic ladies in poker streaming, sponsored on GG. I'm playing 25 an hour Russian cash. I've been, as you can see, a losing player on 25 an hour rush. I've been streaming for about the past year, and that's kind of when I've been taking poker seriously from. Played a bit on full tilt back in the boom days, 24 table and full ring games, but then I had a massive break and started up again last year.
Nice. So I went through many titles when I was considering what to call this series and finally settled on From Stalling to Mauling. Then I googled Mauling to make sure I was spelling it right for the setup, and it turns out I nailed that. And I'm going to read you a few definitions of Mauling, and I know you've already heard them because of our technical screw up that we just did, and we won't try and hide that because that wouldn't be authentic if we pretended that this was the first time we were recording this episode. But I wonder if we can go through these for the audience's sake. So what do we mean by mauling? Why do we want to get you to the point of mauling? Well, we could mean, according to Google, an attack by an animal causing serious injury. How do you feel about attacking and causing serious injury by the end of the series?
I mean, yeah, attacking them on the poker tables, attacking their blinds.
To clarify these things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, attacking their showdown and non-showdown winnings.
And then last time we recorded, you said kind of like a bear, and I said, well, do you have polar ranges in some spots? And then everyone laughed and everyone was happy. It was a great joke, and now it's been ruined by technicalities. The second definition of mauling, where we're headed by the end of this series, is an instance of fierce criticism. And I think this one applies more to me than to you. So maybe from feeling stalled to being mauled, because the criticism on this series, it can be harsh at times. If you watched From Losing to Cruising, did you ever check that out with Mark?
Yes, I did.
So it can be harsh. And sometimes I may look at the camera and say, true Evie. And sometimes I may look at the camera and be really mean. And that's because I'm setting up that little clip for the start that everyone likes to see. So if I ever just attack you out of nowhere, that's why. So tell us a bit about what you feel may be wrong with your game. There'll be stuff that's right with your game too, but clearly this isn't the end result that we want. So what do you think is causing this red line downward spiral and the blue line upward trajectory? And try to not just copy the diagnosis I gave you 10 minutes ago. But maybe do that as well if you want.
I feel like I've ran a bit bad variance wise. I think this graph is like minus 200 EV line, but obviously that's kind of not everything. There is a bit of bad running here, but also some tilt for sure as well. And not in the normal sense, or I suppose kind of the sense that I used to think of it, where people would just go and blitz off 10 buy-ins in a row and just be jamming pre. Nothing like that, just kind of playing a bit more too aggressively in the wrong spots and kind of jamming rivers when maybe I shouldn't. So I feel like the worst parts of my game are kind of almost hard to spot. I feel like my opening ranges and all of that sort of stuff is okay. But then I feel like I'm just also calling too much on rivers. I'm definitely called way too often. So that's definitely one of my leaks, I think.
When I looked at your graph, I had a few thoughts. One of them was that the red line descent here is extremely smooth. It's kind of like there's no big sort of peaks and troughs or jagged cliffs to it. It's just zoom, straight down. And when that's happening, it usually means that in small to medium-sized pots and really common spots, we're not really fighting hard enough, we're not winning enough, we're not exploiting enough. Things like check raising or taking the right line, checking when we could be betting when we could be checking, and getting that right against pool, because it does really matter exploitatively what we do in many of those spots. So I think your small pot play could definitely do with a bit of work. Now that's not what we're going to look at today. Today we're going to be more concerned with big to medium sized pots, because I think there are equally leaks there. But I think the leaks in the bigger pots are more blue line oriented, because if you look at the blue line, normally when you have a nitty, a player that my student and friend Danny would call a cockroach, a player that just survives the nuclear explosion and just keeps knitting it up in their shell and somehow gets by. The cockroach player would have the downward red line and upward blue line in this kind of pincer sort of motion like this, and it would just be really stable. But because your red line and blue line are so asymmetric, the blue line is so jagged and the red line is so smooth, and because the blue line isn't just really winning, nits have really winning blue lines, right? Because they're just going to showdown with good stuff and folding when they don't have it. So I'm so happy that you're not one of those players. Like, we just, no disrespect to Mark, we just had a full series of trying to get somebody that wasn't investing enough and was way too placid to invest more. There was one called Mark, why are you so passive? It was like the whole thing with me shouting at him. So we've done that. We've been there. I'm so glad you're a different kind of case, Jess. This is great.
Yeah, definitely. I say I do kind of check raise. I can run a free barrel bluff. It's just maybe I'm not doing it in the right spaces.
Right, so maybe we're bluffing some spots that are actually underfolded because the blue line is kind of taking a hit here. And if you were bluffing in lots of good spots, I would like to think that red line would have picked up a bit. But I have this theory that in small pots, you might sort of, I don't know if zone out is the right word, but you might not be hungry enough to find the right line. And that might cause the red line to sort of just be a bit neglected in small pots, causing the smooth descent. And then in big pots, would I be right in saying that might be where more of your like tilt or pot attachment issues start to like rear their head when the pot gets bigger?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times when I give hands to people to look at, they kind of, a lot of the time they say, you don't have to win every pot. You can give up. You don't have to be betting this turn and then betting the river again. Or even just turn barreling. Like, I don't blitz it off every single time, but like I would say I probably do barrel too many turns in the wrong spots. And yeah, it's just a kind of like, you don't have to win every pot. I feel like sometimes maybe when I've squeezed like ace king or something,
right,
and then we've got a big pot and we're out of position and I just keep pummeling more money into it. Like,
right. Because this is the thing.
I shouldn't barreling. Yeah.
When people at these stakes start filtering heavily, like they start calling turnover bets or calling flop check raises or aggressing themselves or calling and then aggressing, when they take these like multiple lines of filtering their range, we actually see that many of the spots that follow that are underfolded, that they're then not folding enough. Whereas in the small pots, where they're kind of checking a lot, not protecting their checking ranges, betting small with range on the flop, these are the spots where they're overfolding. I think you're aggressing too much post-filtering, like further down the road in really big pots, without aggressing enough earlier on in the game tree when ranges are really weak and wide and overfolding in many cases. So that's like an extremely optimistic attempt to diagnose someone's game just from a graph. But yeah, it's my Dinosauria in the game, I've made that noun up, Dinosauria, to have been in the game for a very long time and to be old, both of which apply to me. And due to that Dinosauria, I'm able to say, I'm kind of confident in the way your game presents. It presents very much like that. That's not to say I'm totally right, but let's get into some hands. Let's see how right I am. Is it fair to say that I have never before heard you talk about poker? I've never heard you think through a hand, so this is going to be a new experience for both of us.
Yes, definitely. This you really haven't spoke about poker with me at all.
So I don't know what I'm in for here. This could be horrific, or it could be like, oh yeah, you're totally right in everything you say. So let's see. All right, Ace King. The very first hand analysis of From Stalling to Mauling. Should we grade Jess out of 10 every street? Should we make this like really academic? Speaking of academic, what have you done just before I hit play here on Poker Theory? Like what have you done previously, and have you done anything to sort of prepare for this series?
I feel previously I'm not really an academic. I was never really great at school and exams and things like that. I'm not one for studying. It's always been hard. And I kind of like learn by doing stuff instead. I have watched, plenty of poker content, but not really taken a lot in. And I kind of learn a lot more by playing and doing stuff. I recently started doing the Carrot Poker School, went through level 1, compared like with the explanations of EV and equity, and I kind of understand them. Like I could talk about them and tick quite a lot of the homework questions, but don't have a massive understanding of then using that knowledge throughout the tree kind of thing. And then kind of like the second grade reasons for betting and stuff like that, like flop textures and stuff. I've kind of got sparse knowledge of that kind of thing. And I've never really understood why those are the textures that and I feel like, the second lecture is really starting to help me think about hands, I think more better straight away.
So that's grade 1 lecture 2, right? So you've done grade 1 lecture 1 and grade 1 lecture 2. There's 10 lectures in each grade and there's 3 grades. So you're about 2/30ths or 1/15th of your way through the Carrot Poker skills so far. Good. And as someone who's not really who learns more practically, how did you, because I think a lot of people have this problem when they go through the Carrot Poker School or any theoretically dense course, how did you manage to force yourself then to get a lot out of it? Because it's not the kind of course you can throw on for what I would call learn entertainment, where you're chilling at night. It's not like a Netflix series that you want to binge watch. It's more something that you really need to focus and take notes. So did you force yourself to do it at some time of day when you're really alert or something like that?
Yeah, like 100%. I originally started doing it kind of after sessions at night, and within about 15 minutes of the EV and equity video, I was like, this is too dense to be doing it at like 10:30. So I've started doing it kind of at lunchtime when I'm a bit more awake and prepared, and then like, taking notes and just trying to be a bit more focused on it and using it as an active learning thing rather than just watching it, like you're saying.
That's what I
just
would
casually
recommend.
watching it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so it sounds like we're in the right place theoretically then. Let's hear how it actually goes during a hand. So the first couple of streets here, not much going on. We 3-bet ace king, villain calls, don't want to talk about that. Queen 6-5. I'm actually giving you take 2 at this.
Yeah.
You can feel free to repeat what you said in take 1, just so it's authentic. I want you to try to be concise here, as I said on the last run through, the last recording. Be precise. Try not to just exhaustively list every thought that comes to your head, and do try to recreate how you would normally think about the spot rather than doing something different or fancy or trying to, impress me or something with any fancy stuff. I would rather be succinct and accurate than just like exhaustive and kind of rambly. How do you think about this spot?
So yeah, standard 3-bet pre from the small blind. This kind of flop, I would maybe think of c-betting here because we do have queens in our range. We're like 3-betting ace queen, queen king, stuff like that. So yeah, I think this is a flop that I would c-bet. I can't actually remember if I did. Like a lot of these hands, I might say something completely different, but my initial gut reaction to this would be to c-bet this flop.
So last time you said something that was really important that I want to actually force you to repeat, even though I'm going to correct it. So I'm going to like make you say something that I was going to critique so I can critique it again. And that was, you said, we don't want to play a big pot here or something like that. And my critique of that was more just like, well, that applies to like a depolarized hand. So if you have a hand like tens, that makes a ton of sense. But because ace king is going to have really low showdown value by the river on most runouts where it doesn't become a value bet, we're going to consider bluffing with it. And if we're bluffing with it, there's no such thing as pot control. Pot control is like on the banned list of words that I put out on my Twitter a couple of weeks ago. It's very much of that ilk of term. So we don't want to go down that road. But what we can do is just talk about this flop a little bit. I think Queen 6-5 is reasonable for your range. I think your range can bet at high frequency. I think your hand can c-bet. But in the words of the Carrot Poker School, what I'd like us to start doing is putting things into a theoretical bucket of either optional, mandatory, or prohibited. These are like our 3 terms, right? So either you have to, you can, or you really shouldn't. These are like the 3 different worlds you can be in. So theoretically, a c-bet like this is probably just going to be optional. Most of these kind of flop c-bets are. So while you're saying, you hope you c-bet here and that's your gut reaction, fine. If you want to bet all of your range for a small sizing here against the reg, that's a simplification that you can take as well. But overall, I think it's good to start with a base assumption that checking and betting aren't really too different, at least theoretically speaking, right? And probably not in practice either. So I think that's totally fine. So we go for about third pot, which is good as well. I think whether you go big or not will really depend on your nut advantage, like what kind of monopoly you have on like overpairs and sets and top pair, top kicker and things like this. So I think you could also probably use a big bet here without any real EV loss if you wanted. Villain calls, the turn is a queen. Okay, fascinating spot. Let's talk a little bit about this spot then.
I think here, normally I would probably barrel this turn because at this point then, I'm thinking they could definitely float my c-bet with kind of like tens, jacks, stuff like that. They've got a lot of flush draws maybe. They might have even called with hands like 7-8 or suited or something in position. They've got a lot that could float me there on that flop, and we've still got queens in our range. So I feel like this would be maybe a barreling card for me normally.
Yep, so your gut reaction is to just like apply pressure here, try to gain fold equity. Again, just to like steer you back into like slightly more theoretical waters. Do you think that game theory would say you can bluff here? Do you think it would say you must bluff here? Or do you think it would say like you can't bluff here with this hand?
I think this is like a can bluff. I do feel like we can shut down if we want to. But
yeah, exactly.
We can bluff as well.
And it's like, well, how convenient. Like, why is the solver so indifferent all the time? And the idea is that in some spots, the opponent is setting up their strategy to make you indifferent to bluffing. So it's really no accident. The solver is kind of like playing in such a balanced, controlled way that it's making the player in the small blind indifferent to bluffing. Now, when push comes to shove, then what the solver will do is it'll be like, well, In that case, certain combos of Ace King are better to bluff than others, and this is a really unfair thing to force upon you in episode 1 of the series.
Yeah.
But what do you think of your suits here? This might be like
Yes.
alien territory, or it may not, but what do you think of the fact that you have the Ace of Spades and the King of Clubs?
I would be not having any diamonds in our ace and king obviously unblocks them for potentially calling
Or jamming, yeah.
with flush draws.
Mhm.
I feel like I would have much preferred to have a diamond on the flop so that we've got some backdoor stuff that can go on. But then on the turn, maybe it's probably a good thing that we don't have a diamond, because then it still gives them, the flush draws are definitely still in their range.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. That was really helpful for me to hear. So basically, when we're betting the turn, we want to, and this will come at lecture 10, right, of grade 1, so it's like 8 more. If you can survive 8 more hours of theory, then you'll get there. But the idea is that if you block a hand that they are going to continue with, and you're bluffing, that's a good thing. Because actually here, if they have a hand like Ace Jack of Diamonds, or Ace 4 of Diamonds, or King Jack of Diamonds, or King 10 of Diamonds, and you bet here, and they call, that's bad for you. Because the idea is that you don't get to check and showdown on the river with this hand against that. They actually have to bluff that later when you check river.
Right.
They sort of gain a range advantage at that point by calling twice. If you then say, I don't want to have a diamond because I want them to have a diamond, that's assuming that you're allowed to win the pot really often against diamonds. But actually diamonds kill you here, because when they call the turn or shove the turn, they usually win the pot from you unless you triple the river, which has its own risks associated with it. I'm not saying it's bad, but it requires further investment. Here, try and simplify it to just, we want to block the calling range and we want to unblock the folding range. How would you block a calling range here? I know this is a bit theoretical, but what kind of hands are they definitely never folding here on the turn? Give me some examples. We've talked about flush draws. What else are they definitely never folding?
Like ace queen, king
Good.
queen.
How do you block that? How do you block ace queen or king queen?
We block all of the non-diamond ones.
So let's talk suited versus offsuit. Does villain have offsuit here of king queen or ace queen, or is it mainly suited?
It's mainly suited. This is something that I kind of learned in a review of another hand on Discord the other day. It's something that I've never really thought about. Where I kind of, sometimes I think I give villains offsuit combos that they're never really going to have. Like, it's not very often that they're going to call ace queen off in position, I don't think, maybe. I
mean, fishy ones will, right? Like, to some extent, but I think in early position like this, you're right, it's mainly suited. So what that would mean is then, for them to have ace queen, they couldn't have the ace of spades anyway, because the queen is a spade. So your ace of spades doesn't actually block ace queen suited, because ace queen suited is impossible of spades. And your king of clubs doesn't block king queen suited, because king queen of clubs is impossible. So actually the good suits, if you start to think about good suits and bad suits, not because I'm trying to turn you into a GTO bot, that's the last thing I want to do, Jess. I don't want you being a GTO bot, but I do want to give you some guidelines for how to add some definition to your aggression. And the way to do that would be to use hearts and diamonds here, and not so much like spades and clubs. So that's probably like a decent adaptation. If we feel really indifferent about bluffing, we can go to the suits and defer to that. But first off, do we feel indifferent about bluffing? Compared to a solver, these questions they ramp up to get really taxing. So compared to a solver, how do you think a human is going to navigate against a triple barrel? Let's plan ahead a little bit here. If they have 10s, 9s, busted flush draw, that sort of region, how do you think they're going to go with that?
I feel like you sometimes get called down quite light on these flush drawy boards. I don't know if the queen pairing would have an effect on that, but definitely I don't tend to go free barreling on flush drawn boards just because I've been called down light like so often that I just don't do it anymore. I think a lot of the pool kind of sees a missed flush draw and they're like, they've missed their draw, I'm going to call them off with jacks.
Okay, so I think that's a little bit over specific. I think it's a little bit pain memory driven, like where you're remembering the times that happened. You don't see the times they fold jacks, for example, right? So what I'll do is I'll start to introduce like some mass data points where we can say, well, data shows us this over a very large sample. And the idea is that that's more reliable than your gut feeling about what's happened to you in that spot. That's less reliable because it's subject to bias and human emotional interference and all of that stuff. In 3-bit pots generally, the later the position, the more overfolded it is, right? That's the kind of rule here. So in early position, there's a bit less overfolding going on because people do just have more queen X and more jacks and tens and less sort of low pocket pairs and stuff like that here, or ace X floats or whatever. So definitely the fold equity when you're against an early position opener who calls your 3-bets a bit lower. And so this spot probably isn't massively overfolded or anything like that. If this was like button versus big blind or something, though, there's going to be a lot more of those combos they have to mix call down with, like sevens and things like that, and now you might find that it is quite overfolded. So position is such a key factor when it comes to like when to attack and when not to attack. When your opponent's range is early position, what you'll find is that they just generally fold a little bit less. They're a bit snugger to start with, and tripling off here with Ace King is probably okay in theory, and it's okay as well. Like against pool, it's probably neither here nor there. But if the ranges are a bit wider and you go a bit later position here, I think this becomes a really nice exploit to just always do it, basically. The reason I brought up that suit thing is if you really want like a guideline about whether to shut down here or keep barreling on this turn, a great way to start off is just to say, well, if I have a diamond, I get more folds. And if I have a heart or a diamond, I block more of their nuts. So actually, maybe with spade and club specifically, I'll just give up. And I don't think it's a huge mistake to barrel turn here, but I don't think there's a massive exploit here, and I also don't think that it's theoretically the best with these suits. But I don't hate this play or anything. So we do go for the barrel here. Villain calls, 10 river. Now, what we do in this river is going to be really dependent on, again, what we think about our blockers. So now it's a bit better that we don't have diamonds, because diamonds actually bricked. But now we have to think about the fold equity against the pool in this situation. And I think we've already kind of talked about it, that it's unclear. Therefore, when I'm shoving the river here with an ace-king combo, I really do want to prioritize like having a heart probably as my suit that I want to use theoretically. But it's kind of splitting hairs. I don't think tripling here is horrible or anything. So that's why I don't want to spend too much time on this. We've kind of talked about it. So this is sort of, I don't want to say like I told you so, here's the proof, because it's not like that. But I hope this illustrates why hearts are a superior suit to have here than spades or clubs, theoretically. We block this as a combo. Cool. All right. But I wouldn't say that hand is like a catastrophe. Now, let's get into your mental game. I like to get to know my student mental game wise as well. How did you feel when you did this and this bluff was called? What were some reactions you had?
I would say probably annoyance. Annoyance at myself for tripling and getting called.
Let's freeze there. Annoyance at myself for tripling and getting called. Let's unpack that sentence. In fact, let's unpack the latter part. Annoyance at myself for getting called. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably quite an unfair criticism of myself, but it's definitely something I do feel like goes through in my head. Because poker is so kind of vague in the decisions that you should take, it then makes it really hard to think, was this a good bluff or was this a bad bluff? In this kind of spot, I would definitely be like, for God's sake, like I would have been thinking, because I've not really thought much about the suits when I'm blocking, I'd have been thinking, I block king, queen, I block ace, queen. So that makes it then more likely they have tens, jacks, like some sort of diamond draw that might go away. And I'm guessing that's why I've shoved here, because I thought I block king queen. But like you're saying earlier on, we don't block the kind of king queens that they're gonna.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's really good. So what you did there is you repeated back to me. You managed to steer that fully away from the mental domain to the technical domain again, which was impressive, and it almost worked. But I'm going to drag you back to the mental domain now. But the technical summary was really good, because you actually like reiterated in your own words exactly the point that I was making, and you've processed it really well. So that's very encouraging. That's actually relieving. Like I feel a sense of relief right now that this isn't going to be an absolute shit show of a show where I'm like bashing my head against the wall trying to get things through, because you picked up really well. So excellent.
Okay.
Now back to this mental thing. Being angry at oneself for being called is like being angry at yourself because it's raining. It's like something that's out with your control and you're really unhappy with yourself about it. So that's a little bit of an issue, but I totally see where it comes from. It comes from like, well, I'm not getting any feedback from anything. Like, I don't know, it's vague. I'm not getting the right feedback. So I'm going to just use the emotion that springs up, the regret, the natural sort of ouch, I should never have, I call it in poker therapy. And I'm going to take that and turn it into logical criticism. And maybe one of the skills here is to sit with that feeling of pain and sort of like regret and nastiness that we feel after this gets called. Hold it for a second and say, this is just emotions. This is a ball of emotions. This is a ball of reaction. It's like gut human reaction. Okay, I've processed it. I've held it. Let's put it aside. And now let's put the hand aside. Let's be like, cool, well, I'm not going to decide right now while I'm streaming and I'm in my session. I'm not going to do a full analysis. I'll just put myself off future hands. Why don't we compartmentalize it? Open the drawer of the desk. Put the hand in the drawer. Close the drawer again. Had a real drawer to do those sound effects that wasn't edited. And you can actually go ahead and revisit that after the session and explore it fully instead of using the emotion to give you the verdict on the spot. So I think you can sort of understand that your brain will always react that way and it doesn't really mean a great deal, and we really shouldn't start to tear into our technical game about it, because if we do that, we're shredding up our own technical game based on variance, something that was out with our control.
Yes.
Because if the bluff works, do you do that same line of self-interrogation?
Not a chance.
Right.
If the bluff works, I think I'm a pro.
So then we're being blown about by the winds of variance. We're like the helpless feather in the wind there.
Yeah.
Okay. Next. Guys, there are two problems that afflict poker players these days, and it's highly likely that you watching this are succumbing to one of them, and that it's stopping you from realizing your poker potential. The first problem is diving too deep into GTO, studying solvers too deeply too soon, trying to copy their outputs, and maybe just neglecting the reality of what your opponent's range actually is. So many people have lost the ability to hand read these days. That's a huge problem. On the other hand, you have this problem of not enough detail. Coaches, training sites, coaching for profit schemes giving you literally what they call a playbook, a list of commandments. What people who do that are really motivated to do most is to just get you winning quickly by training you almost like an animal, like a chimpanzee or a parrot. And that doesn't make you a poker player. So Cash Injection is a course that's 10 episodes long, that shows you some really killer exploits that are going to work everywhere, micro stakes, low stakes, live. Sometimes people are like, Pete, where does your course work? What stake does it stop working at? And it doesn't really work like that. It just works against most humans. This is mass data driven. We've taken a bunch of information from millions of hands. We've looked at patterns. And I've also coupled that with my own just experience in the game and cognitive understanding as to how people play. I'm going to show you a clip now from Cash Injection. I hope you like it. I hope it whets your appetite. But I do want to let you know that I'm ashamed of this clip. I'm actually not proud of it at all. And that's because my beard in this clip is absolutely atrocious. I don't know what I was thinking. Please forgive me. What has happened to the EV of that choice? Let's locate our hand. Let's turn on the EV view. And we can see that it is now plus 7.77 chips. This is on its way to being a whole big blind, about 3 or 4 tenths of a big blind better than before. This might not sound like a big deal, but over the long run, if you think about it, we express win rates in BB per 100. We're always measuring big blind swings per 100 hands. This is happening in one hand. I have no idea what I was thinking with that facial hair. Anyway, if you like the way this course sounds, it's carrotcorner.com to pick up Cash Injection today and learn some skills, tips and tricks that are going to help you crush the competition quickly, but with full knowledge of what you're doing and why you're doing it. That's the ethos of this course. But yeah, good job. I think that was a productive first hand. Some theoretical points, some mental game points. That's what we want. Good mix. Kings. 3-bet. Call. Okay, so this is interesting. So you go for large bet here. Talk me through why you go for large bet here. I saw you small bet earlier. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong. I just want to hear what's going on.
A large bet here, I would normally think with their call-in range, like they might have a lot of like Broadway cards. There's going to be like maybe some aces, some jacks that stick about, like flush draws. They might have caught like 2 pair, like Queen 10, King 10, even though we kind of block it. And I just feel like we can get a bit more value out of them. So I feel like that's probably why I've bet bigger here, because I think there's a lot that will stick around.
That's reasonable. So there's a concept in poker that the more mergy / pair plus draw heavy they are, like the more you can actually gain by sizing up and getting closer to making lots of those hands indifferent, or like really reducing their EV. So sizing up here with kings, at first sight, people may look at this and be like, but you block top pair. I don't think that's a huge deal. There are a lot of other hands that call you as well. And I think in practice, this is actually quite a good bet, because things like 6s and 7s and 8s and stuff in their range will fold to any size. So it's not like you cost yourself anything against that. And if you do go smaller, for sure they will under raise. The pool will not raise enough. And what I'm doing here, by the way, is I've got this memory of the GTO world. I've got this like impression of it that I've gained from like all of the theory content creation I did with the Carrot Poker School. So I've got this world here, and I'm just glancing over here and saying, well, what's different in reality? This is something you're going to see me do all the time during our coaching. Theory, practice, swiveling between the two and comparing. So if in theory, if I bet small, Billen's meant to do a lot of raising, and I don't think that's happening over here in the real world, well, betting small just got worse because I'm not getting raised as often as I'm supposed to be. If I think my small bets aren't getting raised enough, maybe I just bet big. Maybe I just focus on the part of Villain's range that calls me instead. So I do think this bet actually works quite well in practice against their range. Now, you need to be a bit careful, because in spots where Villain's range is more polarized, you might want to use small bets, and their range is actually very polarized here. So the theoretical answer to this spot is probably bet small, because their range has quite a lot of very good hands in it and some very bad hands in it as well. If you imagine them having sixes, fives, sevens, dreadful, and then ace, jack, tens, very strong hands. But I think in practice this works quite well, this big bet, because they do have a lot of mergy stuff as well. So this one is fine, I think. And the main point is, if you check or if you bet small, I don't think they're going to bluff enough in this environment. I think it's a very under-bluffed environment if you start checking or whatever. So I quite like the big bet.
Yeah.
Turn, we go for another big bet. I mean, I think that seems fine. I think we can sort of skip over this node. Again, I wouldn't check because I think they're really merged. And if they're really merged, I don't think they're going to bluff me. So I may as well just do the value betting myself. That's kind of the argument. Okay. And then the 9 river comes and we check and they shove. So this is a really interesting spot. Let's start with this decision, the decision to check this river. Talk me through that firstly.
So the decision to check there, it would have been like and I was streaming this, so I think it would have been like, oh, for God's sake, like everything's came in, any jack, any spades and stuff like that. But I don't think this was always a check call. So this is trying to let them bluff, if they have any bluffs at all.
Well, let's freeze there. What would people bluff on this node? Like, what kind of hands could bluff the remaining 30 big blinds here?
Maybe some sort of like ace X, like ace 10 that's hanging around looking for a jack. Hands like maybe you could also have like ace 8, ace 9.
Seems unlikely that they call flop with something like ace 8, ace 9. But yeah, okay, a little bit of ace 10. Maybe, I guess it's not unheard of that like ace queen decides to bluff now for the last bet. I do think all of these things are really unlikely though. And the way I might think about this here is, well, if I'm not able to check fold in this spot, because I agree, like at these odds, like check folding seems quite dubious if there are any hands at all that could be turned into a bluff now, then you might just want to consider betting with the idea that there's so little left that, okay, well, what if we do shove and we only have 25% equity when we get it in? Is that bad? Does that mean that we shouldn't shove?
No.
Okay, why not?
We might have some, because we might have some kind of fold equity. Maybe we can make people fold. Maybe we can get calls from like queens, tens, eights.
Right. So that's the key there, right? We're not making anything fold that beats us ever.
Yeah.
So if they fold a worse hand, that's not really a good thing. We don't want to count that as like a fold equity win for us. So it's not that we're bluffing or anything. It's just that we're saying, well, we're taking the worst of it. Probably we're losing a fair amount of the time here. But if I just win like a third of the time, if I shove and you call me with like a set of queens, a set of tens, a set of eights, as you say, or king, queen of hearts or something like that, then that's fine. That's great. I mean, if I check here, I'm going to be getting 6-1 to call it off, or 5-1 to call it off. So I'm not check folding. But isn't it better if we jam ourselves? Do you not think it's better to at least try to get value? If we have to invest here one way or the other, my argument would be at this low SPR, it's better to try to get called by king, queen, tens, eights, queens. That's like 10 combos than it is to hope that ace, queen miraculously just starts bluffing now. I think that's really rare that people bluff ace, queen, ace, 10 here. So it feels a bit more to me like a crying thin value bet. It's not a value bet, but it's like you've got to invest one way or the other. Do you want to invest by trying to get called by worse or by hoping that they bluff? That's your choice.
Yeah, I think some of my thoughts around this hand afterwards was about my turn sizing and whether I could have just jammed turn or like
interesting
bigger on the turn. Because...
So let's explore that. So what spurred you to take that line of questioning then?
Because at this point, it kind of struck me as, I was like, oh, he's only got 30 BB left. And then I was like, that's quite a small bit to have left behind. Maybe I could have sized up on the turn and just tried to get him in on the turn. And it's probably based around because the draw came in. So it's almost like, then at least, we've got our EV line going up.
So that's incredibly arbitrary in the real world, the EV line going up. That's certainly a mental game thing you'd want to address, because the green line is the only one I would even have on in the graph. Like, until we've stopped caring, I would turn the EV line off, because as you said earlier, there's so many ways you can run good and bad, and that's just one of them. But yeah, I think what's going on here is that there's a kind of hindsight working backwards thought process where it's like, bad thing happened, how to remove cause of bad thing by playing turn in this way instead. And I don't think that's great. I think it's fine to just have a thought process where you're like, I can bet big and then I leave a little bit behind. That's not actually theoretically bad or anything. You can just shove the rest on most rivers with most hands. It doesn't really make a big difference. But here maybe it caused you to make a mistake on the river. And so by going for the all-in the turn. You might have avoided that mistake, but you can't set up your poker life in a way where you're trying to avoid all future mistakes and discomfort with your lines. I think that's mainly a mental game leak that's causing you to work back. What I'm seeing today, Jess, is that when you play a big pot, there's quite a lot of thoughts that start to originate that are quite self-critical. You're trying to fix yourself a lot, and I'm not even sure they're that warranted. I think it's actually your reaction to these hands that's worse for your game than what you're doing in these hands themselves.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably a good shot, definitely.
Cool, so that's something to work on. Right, let's do one more. We'll take it a bit light today. We'll get into way more spots in episode 2 of From Stalling to Mauling.
Oh, you didn't even show them what they had.
I always do this because I like to torment them. I like to make them suffer. You guys can thank Jess in the comments for this, by the way. This is not my doing. Yeah, fish player
Queen
type won't
Jack.
flat this.
Yeah.
Yep.
The initial thought after this hand was I was raging at him for calling Queen Jack off to free bet him. So
Right.
What are you doing? What are you even doing in that hand?
And when you stack this hand, because the board doesn't run out this way, you're probably not raging at them. So your emotional brain there thinks that it should be entitled to take all of their money when they don't get there, but not lose to them when they do get there. And unfortunately, this is part of the taxation of getting to play with this player. But I understand it's frustrating, yeah. This is what happens, by the way. You try to just make a light-hearted comment and they'll like start interpreting it as a teacher. It's terrible. There's no respite. So with Queen Jack, this illustrates an important point that a lot of the people in this pool are fish, correct?
Yeah.
And not all of them, but plenty of them are
Decent
fish.
chunk. Yeah.
Decent chunk. And if villain is a fish, then by the time they've reached the river and been checked to, they are infinitely more likely to call off a set out of annoyance than they are to bluff ace queen or ace 10. And that's what's wrong with your river thought process, is that you're trying to get villain to bluff. You know you need to invest the money one way or the other. You're trying to get villain to bluff. Really, you should be trying to get the crying call here from pool, rather than trying to get them to bluff the spot.
Okay.
Either way, it'll suck, but it's a lesser form of sucking if you bet the river. Don't check before you think about it. Never check out of disgust. Reach a spot, experience some disgust, fine, then analyze. Okay, jacks, 3-bet, big blind. You can flat here too, by the way, but yeah, 3 bets, fine. Ace 5 deuce rainbow. We go for the small bet. Turn is a 10. We check. Villain bets. And we call. And then the river goes check, bet, fold. Okay, so I think the turn is the most interesting street of this hand. Would you agree? It's probably the one we want to focus on. So give me a thought process here then.
At this point, I think, the C-bet on the flop's all right because we've definitely got aces in our range. They obviously have some too. 10s. I didn't feel like it was a good card to barrel, and also they have it's an under the gun range, isn't it? So they do have maybe a bit more aces, and then in this spot, kind of check call like a small bet.
Okay, let's go back to the start of the turn thought process here, because I'm not that happy with the way you're thinking about this one, to be honest. So you're saying not a good card to barrel. To me, there's a lot wrong with this statement. It's actually one of my pet peeves, is this like good card to bluff, bad card to bluff. Because what about the fact that your hand is pocket jacks? Should that not be a bit more primary than whether we should bluff? What do you think? Your hand isn't king queen or king jack or something, it's pocket jacks. So why is that relevant?
Just because it's a stronger hand?
So when we're bluffing, what are we doing? Now this is going to be a bunch of like really simple sounding questions. Don't overthink them. So when we're bluffing, what are we generally doing in poker when we're bluffing?
Trying to make better hands fold.
Excellent answer. That might already shed some light on the problem. So when you say to barrel, the problem I have with barrel is that I don't know whether that means that you understand that this would be a bluff if you bet, or whether it means value bet, or what it means. But certainly if we're going to bet big on this turn, or even really at all, then it needs to be cited as either a value bet or a bluff, right? It can't be like something in between. Otherwise we're better off checking. Next question. When we're bluffing, what have we decided not to do? So when we bluff, what have we decided against?
Oh, checking.
So when you decide to pick one thing over another thing, in general, in life, how do you do that? How does that work?
You weigh up your options and try and think of the best one.
Did you try and weigh up your options and think of the best one there, or did you focus on only one of them?
I think I focused on only one of them.
So the two problems with your thought process was the word barrel created this vagueness where you could have even committed a polarization mistake here and bet the middling kind of showdown value hand. And then the other problem, it's linked. You didn't really consider checking as the other option. So this isn't a choice between barreling or folding. It's not a choice between something that's plus EV and zero EV. It's a choice between 2 plus EV lines. And because when villain has 9s or 8s or something like this, and you check and they check and you check and they check, you win. And because when you check and hit a jack on the river, you win a big pot, check has a lot of EV associated with it. Not loads. You take the worst of it now. For sure, you're an underdog in this hand, but check has EV associated with it. So next time that you're in a quote-unquote barrel spot, right, a turn barrel opportunity, let's say, before you evaluate whether a card is good for your range or bad for your range or whether it should be barreled, ask yourself, do I have a bluff or a value bet here? And if I have neither, then nothing else really matters, right? You're not going to be betting.
Yeah.
The 10 isn't actually a bad card to barrel, I wouldn't say. I would say it's fine. And a lot of your gutters improve on this. They pick up a bit more EV. Your range isn't like suffering that badly on this card. So if you did have nothing here, I still wouldn't like saying this is a bad card to barrel, because I don't know that it is. I think fold equity here is fine. It's normal. So if you'd got here with Queen Jack or something, I think betting at high frequency is really normal. And then, like, would we say the 10 is a bad card to barrel and we should give up Queen Jack? I don't know if we would say that. So
I don't think I would there, because we've kind of picked up some more outs for the gut shot and stuff like that. I think the problem then comes from me thinking that Jack still has a bit of value then, and I don't want to be...
Right, I see. So you're kind of saying that card makes it harder for me to value bet Jacks?
Possibly, yeah. Because I feel like, when you mention Queen Jack there, Queen Jack or King Queen, I feel like I would barrel those because I've just picked up 4...
Can I grab your words and change them? Is that okay if I just like try and mold your vocabulary a little bit? Can we say bluff instead of barrel?
Okay.
Because my fear is barrel's too vague and it encompasses like all parts of your range. Whereas if we start saying value bet and bluff, we're going to avoid the polarization errors in the middle a bit more.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we say I would bluff, I know it'll take a while to get used to this, and I'm not trying to like be the thought police like fully in how you talk about the game, but there's certain things we can change, and meaning is important. You know, semantics are important in poker, and I think they're really going to help. So let's say we're going to bluff King Queen, King Jack, etc., because this is not a bad world for a range. It's not a world where we need to like shut down everything and like be really nitty. But we're not going to bluff Jacks because it has too much showdown value, right? It has too much pot share, and we're not going to value bet Jacks because it's not good enough for that. So if we bet, it's a mistake. It's a polarization mistake. Polarization mistakes are betting the middle part of your range for no real purpose. Generally, checking was better. You didn't compare bet with check whenever you do that. So always compare. Okay, so wrap this one up then. We called. Now that we face this bet, run a new node. So the final thing I will make you do today, and then I'll give you a break to chill out, you'll probably need it, is what is the deal here? What's your thought process against this bet?
At this spot, I'd feel like we still do have a bit of showdown value. And so I would call a small bet here. I think maybe if they'd betted bigger, had a bigger case for folding, because then it almost guarantees that the rest goes in on the river. But in this case, when they're betting smaller, there's more of a chance that we'll maybe see some showdown. And also the odds are just better for us, so we might even spike a jack.
Yeah, so clearly like the smaller bet's going to be a call before the bigger bet is going to be a call, because the pot odds are the primary factor. Right, a few things that you said there that I can sort of help you with, I hope. The first one is this idea of showdown value. So showdown value means that we are winning against parts of villain's range currently without improving. So what hands in villain's range are you imagining when you're saying that we have showdown value? I'm not saying we have none. I'm not trying to like coerce you into saying we have none, but like what are you imagining there?
So obviously like 8s, 9s, maybe even like 7s that might float us there. We could get floated by kind of Broadway cards as well that we obviously have showdown value, and that's probably about that. Or maybe there's some like, no, because they opened early positions, so we can take kind of like 3s and 4s and stuff like that out of their range.
Probably, yeah. The thing is here, that while we do beat those hands, there's a couple of problems with citing that as a sufficient reason for us calling this bet. The first one is that I'm not convinced that people with 9s and 8s and 7s are going to bet here at a very high frequency with those hands, because they seem kind of like they themselves maybe have some showdown value. They're not that obvious to bluff with, I don't think. Although they could be bluffs, I agree with you. It could be theoretically. But I don't think this pool's going to bet with 9s here like that frequently, but it does depend on the player. And then the other thing here is just that we have to make it to the river, and we do only need like 21-22% of this pot to call, so I don't think calling this sizing is that bad. I don't think it's like a huge mistake or anything, but this could be a spot that's quite hard to bluff in, and the reason for that is that villain was early position, called a 3-bet, called a flop bet, has filtered, and now maybe needs to bet some of these underpair combos to bluff often enough, because a lot of the King, Queen, King, Jack stuff is blocked by your hand or would have folded flop in the case of a lot of these villains. I'm kind of tempted to say that this could be an underbluffed spot from type players, regs, etc. But if you're against the Fisher, I'm absolutely down with calling, because I think those are the people that will bet more indiscriminately when checked to. They'll just kind of randomly bet with pocket pairs and things. So I don't hate the call, but I thought it'd be useful to dig into the thought process. And I think if there's a bigger bet, we can just go ahead and fold here. But we can maybe be a bit more specific about like range reading and like, is this overbluffed? Is this underbluffed? That kind of thing. Like, is it bluffed less than theory, more than theory? I think by the time you're in river, it's a very underbluff node now, and you have a very horrible bluff catcher here in 2-jacks, right? You're blocking spades and diamonds, which are flop floats. So just talking about how that relates to your blockers again.
Oh, yeah.
King jack of spades, queen jack of spades, queen jack of diamonds, king jack of diamonds, all 4 combos blocked by this hand. This is not the one to call in theory. And if it's bluff under bluffed, that means it's definitely not the one to call in practice. So definitely a good river fold here by you. So we get to finish on a happy note. We'll get through more hands next time. What was that like, Jess? Was that a bit of a bombardment? Was that kind of a shock to the system, or was that okay, like that feedback?
No, yeah, that was good. I like that. It's good to be able to just talk through spots and kind of form some sort of thought process and have that, the questions.
But here, we're going to have a period of time where the way you think about the game and then the way I want you to think about the game are a bit at odds, and there'll be quite a lot of like back and forth, reforging language, reforging thought processes and modes of thinking until we're more on like the same sort of plane of existence there. And that'll take a bit of time. So do expect the first few episodes to be quite like, okay, I'm going to get you to say things, and then I'm going to like grab onto the things and we're going to like rework them a little bit. So it's not a Mauling or an attack or anything. It's not Bristol Rovers. It's not a bear, but it is definitely necessary from stalling, Mauling. The series where we take Jess from that graph you saw at the start. Let's flash the graph one more time for the audience so they can see what we're coming from, to something incredibly Mauling. And we'll be back very soon for episode 2. Jess, thanks so much for being on the show, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the series.
Yes, thank you. Me too.
All right, bye for now, guys.
Bye.